The Women's Fund Forum is a production of the Women's Fund of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee and Nashville Public Television.
Good morning. Human sex trafficking is not relegated to just one country or a country that's many miles and many continents away. It's everywhere. Yes, it's even here in Tennessee. It's in our counties. It's in our neighborhoods. And today I'm honored to be with you to help shine a light on this very dark issue, bring about some awareness, and hopefully bring some action so that we can prevent this problem from spreading and help those who have survived. I would like to introduce a panel of professionals that we are privileged to have with us today who work at this issue every day. They work on the front lines dealing with it as a crime, and they work with the victims and the survivors. I would ask you to refer to your program for their detailed bios, but I will introduce them beginning with my left. Blanche Cook, Assistant United States Attorney for the Middle Tennessee District. Stephen Fogarty, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Margie Quinn, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Carrie Rayson, Executive Director, Magdalene. Derry Smith, Founder and Executive Director, End Slavery, Tennessee. Thank you all for being with us today. Let's begin, Derry, with you, and let's put a face on who this particular victim is in Middle Tennessee, in this state.
Well, whether you're talking globally, nationally, or locally, human traffickers are predators. They're looking for vulnerabilities, they're looking for great needs in people, and those might be needs for a father, for affection, for love, for material things, or just to get away from a hellish home life. And those kinds of needs cross all socioeconomic, educational, racial, and ethnic lines. Though, of course, people who have a lack of social clout have added vulnerability. One of the populations we find many of these victims come from are, for example, runaways and throwaways. The TBI report said that out of the girls who are actually reported as runaways each year, about 1,000 of them are trafficked. And so traffickers will go to places like a bus station and just look to recruit. They'll look for signs of a runaway, maybe a very full backpack, or the child is out during the school day or late at night. And they'll come across as the kind person who will listen to them sympathetically, give them a meal, give them a place to stay. Sounds really good to a vulnerable young person, but it comes at a very high cost.
Okay, thank you, Derry. Carrie Rayson with Magdalene often deals with people who've been victimized in this crime. And Magdalene has done a good job of helping some of these women who've been through the fire get to the other side. Talk a little bit about your work.
Thank you all for being here. It's very heartening to have a crowd like this for a tough conversation. I think that what we do at Magdalene is we say love heals. What we mean by that is that we offer housing first, treatment, and work. Probably 95% of women who come to Magdalene at some point in their lives, usually through adolescence and into early adulthood, meet the federal definition of having been trafficked. And so what we see are primarily women who have moved beyond being trafficked, essentially to the street where they're trafficking themselves. We hear over and over and over again, while every woman's story is different, we hear a similar narrative, and it has resulted in Magdalene taking the position that we really feel like the main driver of sex trafficking, at least in Tennessee, is child sexual abuse. And it starts there in the home, and then a child is removed or runs away and ends up on the street and is vulnerable to whether it's somebody just acting independently or in a more organized fashion, very vulnerable to being trafficked. Then what happens oftentimes is either the girl has already been using alcohol and drugs to numb pain, or she quickly starts using in order to keep up with the demands of trafficking. And so oftentimes by young adulthood, these women are addicted. And what we see then at Magdalene are women who are coming in and they prostitute themselves to buy their drugs. And so because of that, it came out of actually a Davidson County task force 17 years ago. The recommendation was made that this town needed a 2-year program, rent-free, where women could come and heal. And we have done that in partnership with a great number of, large number of nonprofits in town, and have seen great success with women coming through. We actually today Sheila Simpkins is a graduate of the Magdalene program, and she works for us. She is married and has 2 beautiful children. She's in college. Just recently, she also started working for In Slavery to facilitate a group for young women who are in state custody. And so Sheila's here to talk a little bit about her own experience, that journey to healing, and where she is now.
Sheila?
I'm Sheila, and I guess I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. At the age of 6, I started getting molested in my home by my mom and whoever she would bring in. By the time that I was 14, I kind of got tired of everything that was going on, and I ran away. And so I guess I'm one of the runaways or throwbacks or whatever they call us. I was a child that was trying to get away from the horror that was going on in my house. And I met a pimp. I didn't really realize that he was a pimp at the time. I thought that he was going to be my boyfriend. He told me that he loved me and that he would take care of me. And the next thing you know, I was being sold. I would be found, I'd be put into juvenile hall, or I would get put into group homes. And honestly, I would run away. I felt like I was being punished for something that happened at home. I didn't feel like the places that I was being sent to understood what I was going through. And so I would run. I ended up getting with another pimp that I ended up staying with for 12 years. I didn't stay because I wanted to. I was kind of conditioned to stay. I was so scared that I didn't know what to do. I ran a couple of different times, and somehow or another he'd find me. And I didn't realize exactly the extent of the abuse that I went through until I was in the Magdalene program, and I went through chemotherapy, and I really got to see my head because I had lost all my hair. Then I got to see the road map of the abuse that I actually went through. But I stayed in that situation until back in '96, whenever I came to Nashville, and I met this guy that was willing to help me. He wasn't afraid of the guy that the pimp that I was with, and he served him and told him that I chose up. But I hadn't really. He was just helping me out to get me away from that situation. And like Carrie just said. My life didn't change at that point. I was still prostituting because by then I was a crackhead. You know, I had an addiction that I needed to support. So I continued the prostitution for about eight more years in Nashville up on Murfreesboro Road. There was an outreach that they had done at Trafficking Community College. The Magdalene program was out there talking to the women. I was actually walking up the street, and that's when the seed was planted. There was a really nice lady that was talking to me, and she actually had talked me into coming to the program. They took me back to this place where I was staying, and I went in and I got stuck and I never came back out. And so whenever I went to jail 5 months later, I had wrote the judge a letter telling him about the Magdalene program and would he please give me the opportunity to go into the program. And I've been clean since. I came into the Magdalene program in November of 2004. The first thing that they did for me is they put me through treatment, because until I dealt with my drug addiction, I wasn't able to do anything else. And so that was the first thing that they dealt with. I think the greatest gift that I got from the program was the ability to forgive. Through a lot of intensive treatment that I went through during the 2 years, I was able to deal with my relationship with my mom. And so now my mom is my best friend, you know, and I truly, truly forgive her for not being the mom that she should have been. You know, she was supposed to raise me correctly and save me. She wasn't supposed to allow things to happen, you know. She's supposed to be my protector. I believe that it's my calling to give back to women who are just like me. And so I have been working at the program for 6 years. I'm currently like 33 credits away from getting my bachelor's in psychology, and I plan on furthering my career and getting my master's in either social work or getting my LPC, because I just think that with my life experience and then also getting an education, I'll be able to better serve the women that I come across. You know, I've been in a lot of different places in my life, you know, as far as like trying to get help. But I think that the reason why the Magdalene program worked so well for me, and probably for the other women, but I can only speak for myself, is that it gave me 2 years to work on all those issues that sent me to the street in the first place. You know, when I was a child, that wasn't my dream to be a prostitute and a drug addict, walking up and down streets, selling my body to support a dope habit. That wasn't my dream. But when you get to come to a place and you don't have to worry about where you're going to lay your head, you know, and you don't have to pay rent, so you don't have to be overwhelmed. It gives you that opportunity where you can really focus on all the deep core issues. And then with my record that I have, because I have a pretty bad record, I must admit, you know, I do. I have a pretty bad record. It would have been hard for me to go out and get a job. And so Thistle Farms, our social enterprise that was created for the women, it kind of helped. I chose not to stay there for too long because I'm more pulled on the peer counseling aspect of the life. But that was one of the great gifts of not having to worry about paying rent and being able to just take care of myself, you know, and learn how to love on myself. And then I have a community of people that also love on me, because I went through breast cancer while I was in that program, you know, and it ended up truly being one of the greatest things to happen to me, because it helped me get connected with the inner person, and then my outside appearance wasn't as important anymore.
Well, Sheila, excuse me for interrupting, but we appreciate you sharing your story, and I want to just give an opportunity to show how your story relates to so many others.
Okay.
And Sheila will continue to join the conversation as we move on, but thank you very
Sheila.
much, and you're to be commended for the work you've done. We're so glad you're in the place you are. Sheila was talking about how she had to learn to love herself, and she came out of a situation that probably is very representative of many others. Margie, can you give us a little bit of an idea about how many Sheilas are out there? What is the scope of this problem in our state?
Well, the TBI answered the call from the General Assembly last year when they passed Public Chapter 1023 calling for a comprehensive quantitative study of human sex trafficking in the state, we answered that call and published a report in May of 2011 that I think really shocked a number of Tennesseans. I know it shocked us at TBI. And the picture in Tennessee looks much more grave than we would have originally thought. And it looks like between 1,500 and 3,500 juveniles were trafficked over a period of about 24 months in the state of Tennessee. There has been a secondary study now done by the Shapiro Group out of Atlanta. They are estimating about 94 minors are being trafficked per month in the state of Tennessee. And those numbers march right along with TBI's numbers. We've talked about runaways and throwaways. Between 600 and 900 kids every month are reported missing in the state of Tennessee. The National Runaway Switchboard reported receiving over 1,800 calls just in 2010 from homeless teenagers in the state of Tennessee. So I think when you're talking about supply, there's quite a supply here in Tennessee. And I think if you want to look at demand and talk about demand, there are over 18,500 sex offenders registered in the state of Tennessee, and on any given month, between 65 and 70% of those are on the registry for an offense against a minor. So I think we have supply and we have demand, and that's frankly the recipe for disaster in our state. So now that we have the statistics, I think we've done a really great job in Tennessee. Our lawmakers have done a great thing by passing a number of new pieces of legislation in the last 24 months. A lot of policy changes occurring here in the state, and Tennessee is actually being looked at across the country as one of the nation's leaders in new laws against human sex trafficking. We're one of the top tier states in the country, and our legislative package last year alone was ranked as the second in the nation. So I think there's some really good things, really positive things that are coming out of the study that was conducted, of the actions that have been taken by our General Assembly here in Tennessee.
Okay. It's interesting to hear terms like supply and market when we're talking about this topic, but access, I think, also seems to be an issue. And Steve, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how prevalent this problem is in this area because of where we're located in proximity to interstates and other major centers for human sex trafficking.
Sure. As you know, Nashville, has the 3 interstate highways. We have an airport. I think we have a thriving economy. We have this huge convention center that's about to open downtown, which will hopefully bring more to Nashville and help the local economy. What I find is, and I've been in Middle Tennessee a little over 2 years, is that partnering with the Metro Vice Unit, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and our other local and state law enforcement partners, is that that a lot of roads lead to Atlanta. A lot of roads lead to Atlanta. We see a lot of stuff coming to and from Atlanta, and you could say that about a lot of the criminal enterprises, narcotics, along with the sex trafficking, and we see it. And I've never been, in my 2 years here in Nashville, I've never been in as many hotel rooms or got to know hotel managers on a first-name basis like I have here, because we're so proactive. The access, I just brought this from the city paper. Looking for a special friend, rambunctiously cute. 2 is always better than 1. Just go online and put in, escort services, and they're advertising all the time. And we are at those crossroads where there's a lot of activity. In fact, we had the opportunity to interview a lady some time ago, and she indicated that because Atlanta had become so oversaturated that the Nashville market was seen as attractive, and they saw some more movement into the Nashville market for that. And this would not exist without a demand. And that's why we work hard with our local and state partners, not only on their stings, but also on the reverses where they end up getting the Johns. Trying to interview the Johns, trying to interview the other women, looking for that nugget that will help us recover that minor, because they're out there. And we've recovered them this year working with Metro and many of the other agencies, and then trying to gather that criminal intelligence that we can pass along to our field office in Atlanta or Charlotte or Knoxville to help them go out and recover other children.
So some of the things that make us really attractive for a number of reasons, great hospitality, entertainment, all of those things factor into what you're talking about in terms of this demand and market for sex trafficking as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about how the state and the federal agencies work together. You've got interstates and you've got local jurisdictions all impacted by this.
Sure. We don't have a formal task force here per se for these agencies, and I'm going to defer to Blanche here in a minute because her agency, the U.S. Attorney's Office, has been at the forefront to get this a little more formally organized. We have a great working relationship. I can't say enough about the folks at Metro that I work with, their youth services, their vice unit. And I don't mean to make it a bunch of gloom and doom. One thing I can tell you about having a proactive stance, and I know those guys do, is that we've had people interviewed in other field offices that are involved in the industry, men or women, and they will say over a period of time, there's certain places that folks tend to start steering away from. And within the last 6 months, I can tell you that one of those places they wanted to steer away from was Nashville because of how proactive the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department have been in addressing that problem. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go away altogether, but I don't want it to be all gloom and doom either. You know, when you hear the bad guys saying, some of the bad guys saying, you know, Nashville, you know, maybe you need to go out, right in Nashville, those guys are pretty proactive and they're pretty aggressive. Maybe we need to go someplace else. And I like to think that now we have a very good relationship with those guys. And we're going out here and we're being proactive. We're interviewing these girls. We're going to the hotels. We're having them call us. We're looking for, you know, Derry and Carrie. We're very interactive. I've dealt with everyone on this panel pretty much since I've been in Nashville. And it's all about having communication, knowing where to go with it, and knowing who to trust with the information. Because a lot of these girls don't want to come right to the police or law enforcement. A lot of times they're going to come through Derry or Carrie or another organization because they're a little leery, and to be able to have that relationship where they say, you know, I know a guy you can talk to. He's okay. You know, he doesn't bite. You can tell him your story. You can trust him. And I can go on forever, but I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll come back to you in a moment. Being proactive and sort of clearing the deck a little bit in Nashville, does that sometimes push people out to other jurisdictions? And how does that become a challenge when it comes to litigating these cases? Blanche, maybe you can address that.
Yeah, your question has a lot of meat for discussion. One of the things I wanted to emphasize to the audience is sex trafficking isn't something that's isolated to some third world country or some remote area of the nation. Sex trafficking, I think, affects all races, all classes. You should be aware that in recent litigation we've dealt with in our office, we've had victims who were from affluent families in the suburbs who were, alienated for any number of reasons that young girls are alienated, and they were ripe for manipulation and therefore sex trafficking. So I want to make sure the audience understands that sex trafficking is something that affects every race, every class, and every area of the country. What we see in Nashville in terms of federal prosecutions, our radar is heightened for large-scale sex trafficking organizations. We just finished the first phase of 6 trials involving a 30-defendant case, all of whom are involved in sex trafficking of young girls and also women from Minnesota to Ohio through Nashville. So what we see in terms of our federal prosecutions, what we're sensitive to are obviously the sex trafficking of juveniles, but also sex trafficking that involves adults, particularly women or men or who've been subjected to sex trafficking through force and fraud.
All right. We've talked a lot about, well, we've talked exclusively almost about women, but this isn't a problem of just the female gender, is it?
No,
Okay.
no, and it shouldn't be. I think I will defer to the wisdom of the panel on this. What we try to avoid is profiling a particular kind of victim. There are certain characteristics of victims that I think are shared across the board in terms of ripeness for manipulation, early abuse when they're children. But the thing that the audience should understand is, again, this isn't isolated to women. It is something that is perpetrated against young boys. The key here is vulnerability, whether that's vulnerability that's created socioeconomically, emotionally, or through abuse. But what we're dealing with is a population that is ripe for abuse. We are dealing with a class of defendants who should never be discounted or underestimated. They are equally sophisticated in their ability to spot someone who's ready for manipulation and therefore trafficking.
It's often easy to blame the victim in situations like this. What are some of the indicators that people might be aware of that would help them to understand that someone is in trouble and someone might need access to some of the resources that are in the program today and that you all represent without placing the blame on the victim?
This is a really interesting question. One of the points that I wanted to make to the audience as well is that the internet has fundamentally changed our relationship to goods and services, commodities and markets, and I hate to talk about sex in those terms, but the audience should understand that the availability of juvenile prostitutes is literally something that can happen within a matter of hours based on the access driven by the internet. The thing that you should take away from that is to realize that, again, a victim could be any number of people. It could be someone in your family. It could be someone in the school in which your children attend. Heaven forbid it's one of your children. But the thing that you should be aware of is that you have to police, obviously, what your children are doing over the internet. Obviously, police their friends, police your children. I hate to use terms like police. I don't have children, and I'm sure that if I did, they wouldn't appreciate my using the term police. But it is a fundamental problem and a very sensitive problem. I don't think that you can be aggressive enough in watching your children, watching their friends, watching their activity on the internet to make sure that they are not interacting with individuals who have plans for them that includes a very detailed, very sophisticated line of manipulation that eventually leads them to sex trafficking.
Derry, I'd like for you to also talk to that just a little bit, because we've heard from Sheila, and even in the video clip, the person we heard from was an adult. But this is really a problem of children, and Sheila's story began when she was preteen, I believe, 14. So in the moment, we're really talking about children for the most part, correct?
For the most part, that is when this people are victimized, and we've actually noticed that. We've noticed that when we speak to girls, typically as soon as they start telling their story, we know what the rest of the pieces are going to look like. There are a few basic tactics that traffickers use to lure young people, and so when you're talking about prevention, we're going out and educating parents and teachers and young people to recognize what those tactics are, so that when somebody is offering them a great job as a model or coming along as their boyfriend who's going to buy them all sorts of nice things, those alarm bells are going off, and hopefully we can stop somebody from being trafficked.
Mm-hmm. And how do you usually intervene at that point when folks come to you? How do they come to you usually?
We get referrals through so many different means. Some of it because we train professional groups and we talk to community organizations, and all of a sudden the light bulbs will go off and they'll realize, oh, this is a trafficking victim I have next to me, because they're not going to just self-disclose. For one thing, they don't know who to trust, and that's an understandable problem. So sometimes they'll call us and say, will you come here and talk to this individual? Law enforcement often is the source that refers to us, because law enforcement does a fabulous job in this area on investigating and rescuing, but the mandate ends at that point, and that's where we come in and we take over the long-term care.
Are people utilizing the hotlines and contacting?
That would be a Margie question.
Contacting you, and is it leading to some successful interventions?
We are taking, the TBI does host the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline, a piece of legislation that was passed a year and a half ago. It went operational a year ago this October. We aren't receiving a tremendous amount of calling on that hotline because we've not really done any publicity for it. We recognize that victims might feel inhibited from calling a law enforcement hotline, but we felt pretty strongly about having it at TBI. We feel very honored to host the hotline. We want to do for victims what's right. If a victim calls and says, I don't really want the police, but I want help, then I might call Dairy, or I might call another one of our nonprofits in Middle Tennessee to try to get that victim to services. We're going to do what the victim asks for us to do, but we also know that because we're law enforcement, because there is this general mistrust, not only for law enforcement, but for adults in general, I think for this victim population, we want to be very careful and very sensitive about the kind of information that gets put out about the hotline. And I think that's where the women's funds are really stepping up to the plate. They have offered to try to put together a comprehensive publicity package for the hotline in Tennessee as a philanthropic endeavor. And I think that that could have a tremendous impact both in identifying victims across the state, but in pointing victims towards treatment, towards help, if they want it, if they need it. It will also, I think, enable us in law enforcement to put together pieces of the puzzle. If victims call in or tips and leads call in, we're in a position to put that information together so that it looks like a clear picture for us in Tennessee. We've never had that opportunity before. We've never had that kind of information available to us before. So those are really our goals for the hotline, and we hope when this publicity campaign starts next year that we will see a dramatic increase in the number of calls and information that we get through the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline.
Yes, Carrie, did you have something to add to that?
Not necessarily to what Margie's speaking about, but I want to, before we go on, I want to say again, most of you, I'm sure, are aware that DCS has been in the news. DCS is not here with us today. DCS is our system. And I think it really, you know, if you're sitting out here and you're thinking, what can I do? It would be to educate yourself about what happens to children in Tennessee who are known to people as victims, particularly of child sexual abuse. And because, and I'm going to try and be very brief with this, but I've thought a lot about, like, if the question is, who is that child? The Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth have a separate committee, and it's called the Second Look Committee. And they look at cases of severe abuse where a child is reoffended. And there were 256 cases of that in Tennessee last year. 77% of those children were victims of child sexual abuse. So if you want to think about who might be coming down the road and what might be done to change that trajectory, I think we all need to look very carefully at what we're doing as a state to take care of those very vulnerable children. And I want to make sure I got that in today. I'd like to see DCS and child advocacy centers, Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, I'd like to see those folks present in these discussions going forward. And I think it would be very important for you all to ask them to be present.
Well, what efforts are being made to sort of coordinate efforts?
Margie has a lot going on, and we're all we're all coming right along to the table with her.
Well, and there's
I think
something new development as well, right? The task force. Can you talk about that, one of you?
I will defer to Margie to other things, but the United States Attorney's Office here in the Middle District of Tennessee, and very briefly for those of you who may not be familiar with the distinction between federal and state jurisdiction, most of the television shows that you see involving law and lawyers are actually district attorneys who work for the state. There are also people like myself who are federal prosecutors who work for the federal government. Unfortunately, there are no television shows devoted to what we do, but that's a story for another day. The Attorney General has sent a mandate to all the U.S. Attorney's offices throughout the nation. There are 94, mandating that every office put together a human trafficking task force. And we take that mandate very seriously here in the Middle District of Tennessee. We are now composing a group of individuals and organizations within this rubric. Our purpose is to identify possible cases for litigation, to make sure that we understand those cases exist, to make sure that they are referred appropriately for state prosecution or federal prosecution, to monitor them very carefully and to make sure that they don't slip between the cracks, but also to provide resources to victims. So we work actively with other federal agencies. We work with local law enforcement. We certainly work with actually everybody that's on this panel. And our goal, once again, is to make sure that we have our eye on these cases and that we stay on top of this litigation.
And the U.S. Attorney's Office is the main coordinating
That's exactly
agency.
right. Jerry Martin, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Tennessee, is the actual head of the overall committee.
And is that in place now?
It is in place now. We had our first meeting last week, largely introductory and resource sharing amongst ourselves, even though we're familiar with one another. But as I stated, our goal is to make sure that we've identified cases for prosecution.
And is everyone going to play well together?
Oh, we work very, very well together.
Okay.
We have played well together. We have good history. I mean, this is one of those refreshing areas where people have a genuine interest in the subject matter, and as a result, we get on the same page. We work beautifully together. I've worked with everybody here in terms of the committee, but I've also worked with Margie as an expert witness. So, I mean, we have long-standing relationships with one another, and we work really well together.
Great, great. Well, with that starting now and the hotline gearing up with publicity, where does Tennessee rank compared to other states? It sounds like there are a lot of very proactive things being done here. How does Tennessee compare to other states in addressing this problem?
I'm not sure we can compare numbers because, frankly, no other state has attempted the kind of quantitative study that we have, although there are states now that are replicating the methodology that we used. FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Florida should report out pretty soon. Georgia is attempting a study. Alabama is looking at doing some sort of study. I think regionally we're really having an impact and an influence on what's going on from a state policy level. I can tell you that when we got the results of the study, there were several things that really stood out for us at TBI. One was that 79% of the respondents that we queried in our survey said they didn't feel like their departments and agencies were adequately trained to recognize and investigate and prosecute cases of human trafficking. And that's largely that referred to law enforcement and social services. And when we got that number back, we said, you know, that's really not palatable for us. That's just not a workable number for us in Tennessee. And so the TBI developed and rolled out a comprehensive training program for first responders. And by first responders, I mean law enforcement and social services and child advocacy centers and medical treatment personnel and emergency room doctors and nurses, nonprofits. We've invited everybody to the table at these training programs. And I can tell you that it's a little prickly at first because everybody comes at this issue from a different perspective. And that's to be expected. But this issue, I think, like no other that I've ever seen in my 20 years of law enforcement, is one in which we're going to have to work together. We're going to have a robust dialogue between all the different entities, law enforcement and prosecutors and nonprofits. I can tell you from a law enforcement standpoint, we really would prefer to just lock them up and we're done. But we can't do that. We can't go to trial and prosecute a case if we don't have a victim, if we don't have a witness. And so it behooves me in law enforcement to make sure that my victim has got access to treatment. Because if she doesn't have access to treatment, he or she's probably not going to be a great witness. She's probably not going to be able to participate in her own justice. So what we're trying to do with this training program is to facilitate this dialogue between all these entities and inform people, educate the first responders out there, those people who are going to come in contact with victims and perpetrators, what it looks like, what we can do about it, where the resources are located. You have a blue card in the insert in your program. Those were developed as part of our training program, and they're meant to go in every single patrol car and in the hands of every single social services worker and every single court clerk across the state. And it's not all you need to know, but it's a start. It's the beginning of what you need to know. And it lists numbers and resources to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to the FBI, to the TBI, to nonprofits. Resources that, again, people in our survey said they didn't know where to look for. They didn't know where to go to find resources for victims. And so we feel like by putting that kind of information out, by developing a training program and putting it out there for first responders, we begin to educate not only citizens, but people who are going to be on the front lines, are going to experience or come in contact with potential victims. Identifying potential victims has got to be one of our first priorities. We've got to start there. So those are some of the things that we've got going on at TBI, and I think from a state level perspective.
Steve, I'd love for you to comment about that too, maybe speak a little bit because of your background about the first responders, what the challenges are and how this might be helpful to them in intervening in these cases.
Sure. When I worked on an Indian reservation for 4 years out in northern Arizona, I was a forensic interviewer, and I did a number of child sexual abuse interviews with young children, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, family members, acquaintances. Then I turn and I come to Nashville and I'm working this. And when you go in, it's a much different interview and trying to get them on board because you have 15-year-olds going on 50, 16-year-olds going on 60. They all have a PhD in streetwise. They're very savvy, and a lot of times they've had to adapt to survive. So that, you know, it's a mechanism that they had to come upon. I've found that making sure that the first responders understand that there are services available, and we've taken use of our victim specialist, Rachel Pierce, is not here today. She's a tremendous help, and Darian Carey and everybody up here knows her, and she's great about, and we're fortunate with the FBI to have that full-time victim specialist here, so when we have a victim, I can go to Rachel and say, hey, look, let's help her out, and she can go to it with all of her connections while myself, and whether it's Metro or TBI, we can go work the case and catch the bad guy, because it's a two-pronged attack. You've got to address the victim and their needs and get them stabilized and get them headed in the right direction, because you need them, because generally speaking, this bad guy over here, you think that's the only person that he's trafficked? You think that's the only thing he's involved in? Probably not. And that victim or witness, having them on board, giving them the services they need to get back on track is absolutely fundamental. And I can't say enough about what the NGOs and these other organizations do that bring things to the table to get housing, to get treatment. I mean, it's phenomenal, and it makes our job much easier to worry about, okay, focus on catching the bad guy, making your case against him, knowing that the victim is completely taken care of and has access to what the victim needs to turn things around. And when they turn things around, they'll be like, you know, they've come to you before and they go, hey, they know it's wrong, now I want to cooperate, I'm back on track. And a lot of times with these first responders, the problems you run into, a lot of times these girls are going to lie to you. In fact, pretty much every time, I guess they're going to lie to you, especially if they're caught in a motel room sting. Not the best place to generally interview them. I learned that when I first got here. and they're going to tell you certain things, and you got to be careful, because Blanche, and this is something I would real quickly divert a Blanche on. If you lie, and unless there's time critical information you need, if you can back off, get them the services they need, reapproach them the next day, the day after, with a forensic interviewer or someone else to make sure that they are where they need to be, and don't let them lie to you, because the more they lie to you, even though they are a victim, and Blanche can work around that, and I'll let her comment real quickly on that, the credibility is a huge issue.
All right. Sex trafficking cases are very problematic for any number of reasons, not the least of which our main witnesses have some fundamental problems, have been trafficked for years, may be victims of substance abuse. So stabilizing our victim witness is a first priority, because as everybody mentioned on the panel, without that person we don't have a case. And the thing that the audience should understand about this kind of litigation, unlike burglaries or arsons or fraud, the victims in these cases actually have relationships to some of the perpetrators. And these are intimate relationships. And the crime itself involves intimate details of their lives. We've had victim witnesses who've been on the stand testifying for an entire week, and that includes cross-examination. That is a very difficult position to be in. Before our victim witnesses are ready for that, we have spent months trying to get them services so that they can withstand the challenges of cross-examination as well as direct. Steve is fundamentally right. The first responders in their approach to the victim are very, very important people, because it's that first responder that can alienate the victim right at the outset, or have the proper training to actually reach out to that person and get them prepared to take a kind of charge of their life and eventually becoming a witness against a perpetrator. So Steve's fundamentally right. There's a great deal of training needed for first responders to make sure that they are not criminalizing the victims, that they are actually treating them as victims of crime with a view toward using them as witnesses in the future.
Okay. Yes,
I
Karen.
wanted to add one more thing here. Margie said earlier that when stakeholders like all of us get to the table, at first things can be a little prickly, and I'm going to give you an example of that by way of what you all are talking about, and that is that I want to put it right out on the table. At Magdalene, we have actually never felt like a woman had to testify in a criminal proceeding in order to heal. And so that's an important point to make. And it may be in the years to come, with more coordination and greater public awareness, that we'll actually have the experience of a woman coming through Magdalene having that opportunity. Those opportunities have not presented themselves, to my knowledge, to women coming through Magdalene. We have young women. We've had women as young as 18 and 19 years old in the program. That's our take on it, and it's actually the take of the Sexual Assault Center, who we work very closely with. And that's not to say that we wouldn't have women who might get to a point where they could do that, and the trial itself wouldn't be traumatic, which I think is what you're referring to. What makes these cases hard to go through with is just the human toll it can take on someone who's in the position of being a witness. And so that's when things get prickly at some of these discussions about wanting women to come in and heal and let them make a decision about what that means, and whether participating in criminal proceedings are going to be part of their healing process or not.
So are you saying you don't necessarily endorse that, or you're saying it's just a difficult thing to...
I'm not, no. What I'm saying is that, to my knowledge, we have not had a woman come through Magdalene, all of whom have been trafficked at some point, be part of a criminal investigation that's current, where they would then be asked to testify. What I do know is that we don't believe that a victim has to have that experience in order to heal from the abuse, the trafficking, and then prostitution. And I really want to say that because it's a good discussion to have. It's one of the reasons when Margie talks about bringing people together, people really do. We all do have very different perspectives on the problem, and all of you all come here with your own perspectives. And I think I want to say that there's a lot of places where you can get involved. There's a lot of ways to do it. Educating yourself first. There's such great information on the internet. There's a federal study that is incredibly dense and lengthy. There's a study on the internet now by an NGO called Shared Hope International. Both of those studies look at domestic trafficking. And then our own TBI report. And I think once if you leave here interested in knowing more, you could start there and then proceed forward, knowing that there are lots of stakeholders and lots of ways to get involved and be supportive.
Okay. Seems like one of the challenges then might be reconciling what you're saying about how to heal, the need to heal, and the need to curtail the crime.
And the needs of the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure we've got that answered.
Okay. All right. Yes, did you want
something
to say
to that? I totally agree, and we would never make our services be contingent on whether somebody was testifying. We're going to always be there as a victim advocate and do what's best for them. On the flip side of that, just to add a little different perspective, I've worked with several young girls who have gone through federal trials. None of them wanted to do it at the beginning. They were dealing with so much in their own lives. Looking down the road and looking back, in those few cases, they were glad, and it actually ended up being part of the healing process because they felt like they had done something proactive. They had helped keep that, what happened to them, from happening to other girls. So, two sides.
Well, we're seeing just how complex this can be for those involved on the front line. And I know some of you probably have some questions for our panelists. So if you have a question, I'd like for you to raise your hand. We have a helper who's going to come to you with the microphone, and if you would ask your question, go ahead, Marielle, and address whichever panelist you'd like to answer.
Mark Orverlock, General Hospital. I'm a little concerned about DCS and your comments. I noticed on the little cheat sheet, sort of the default standard is go straight to DCS. If you could amplify on the kind of advocacy you need. Do we need to be sort of calling DCS, making sure they have more resources? I've seen them in the paper like we all have, so I'm just a little concerned about you saying watch out for DCS, and on the other hand, that's where we go first.
I'm not saying watch out for DCS. I'm saying that that's the system we have in Tennessee, and that's what the law requires. If you encounter a young person who you think is being sexually abused, either by a family member or being trafficked and being sexually abused by Johns, then you, particularly folks at a place like General Hospital, are required to call DCS first. And then once DCS gets involved, lots of things can happen to one individual child. And that's what I'm saying, is I think it's very important. It's an important piece of this to understand what can happen when one minor runs the gamut of what DCS brings to the table. And I'm not saying that the system is bad, and I'm not saying it's good. It's that it's our system, and it is our experience with women at Magdalen that it starts with childhood sexual abuse.
Let me also address that. I think that there is a road or a mechanism right now for changing some of the policy. Next week, on Tuesday and Wednesday, the TBI will be hosting a large stakeholder group in response to Public Chapter 963. It is a victim treatment plan piece of legislation, and the legislature asked for Commissioner Hatter over the Department of Human Services to spearhead a group to come up with a comprehensive victim services plan for victims of human trafficking in Tennessee. And the legislature asked for 6 deliverables within that legislation, and you can, again, it's Public Chapter 963, you can look that up. But we have invited about 50 of the major stakeholders from the child advocacy centers. DCS will be heavily represented. Carrie will be there, Derry will be there, law enforcement, prosecutors, and we will answer that and report back to the legislature by July of 2013. That will be the roadmap, I think, for changing the public policy about how we treat victims of human trafficking, be they minors or adults. But that's what should, I think, change or tweak the system that we're currently under.
So developing a different process for those particular victims.
Exactly.
Rather, okay.
Instead of forcing them down the 2 tracks that DCS has available now, either a juvenile justice track or a dependent neglect track. In July of 2011, the legislature decriminalized prostitution for minors. That's the right way to go. We should not be charging 13-year-olds with prostitution. It's a crime they can't legally engage in to begin with. And that was happening all across our state to a fairly alarming degree. So then what do you do with them? You can't criminalize them, and you cannot lock them up. They cannot go behind a locked door if they are not charged with a criminal violation. So now we're a little bit in a trick bag, because these are the types of victims that if you put them back in group home or you put them back in foster care, they might be there an hour, but probably not. And I'm just saying that from personal experience. We're all saying that from personal experience. We've seen it. So that's where the system's got to change. And I think you will see DCS and other state agencies very open to changing and talking about different solutions for this victim population.
So there's already some consensus. It's just a matter of figuring out where to centralize this
Exactly.
this process. And they're using, DCS is using the tools and the avenues they have available right now.
Right.
So they need another one. Yes, Steve.
Right.
One thing I would go back to about not pressuring the victim when you come up on them in a room, and we've done this with Metro many times this year. A lot of juveniles from Minnesota, Atlanta, Texas, unaccompanied, most of them reported missing, endangered. So what happens? Well, they can't be charged with prostitution, which is the right thing. So DCS takes them as unaccompanied, and they place them. All right, so if we try not to push an interview in that room because we're trying to get them some services, trying to do the right thing, okay, maybe they're not receptive to talking at the time, we'll get them the next day or the following day. Well, they go into DCS custody, and DCS really can only do one thing. If they put them in foster care, because there's not a criminal charge on them, so they put them in foster care, on several of these cases, they're gone within days. The foster parent's not going to handcuff them to the bed.
Or hours.
Or hours, thank you. and they're gone. So then, I say, hey, Blanche, we got this case. Oh, it sounds pretty good. What did they say? Well, we didn't really get much interview. We didn't do much of an interview. It wasn't really a good time. We wanted to oh, by the way, they're in the wind. And I've got no idea where they are.
Which also means our case is in the wind.
Mm-hmm. And poof, they're gone. And then maybe they turn up in 3 months. Maybe they turn up in 6 months. Maybe now they've aged out and they turn up in another state, 6 states away, and they're 18, and they tell the police when they get encountered at another motel, I'm good, I'm 18, I'm out of here. And it makes it very challenging in these cases.
Yeah, do we have any other? Yes.
Yes, my name is Beth O'Shea, and I do children. And I have large concerns I want to point out, emphasize the importance of putting a system in place that addresses the needs of kids. Kids cannot go back, teenagers. I worked at a high school. I ran a high school for children in recovery from addiction here in Nashville. I did that for 4 years. The school closed for lack of funding. It was very, very expensive to educate these children. We had to have a licensed alcohol and drug counselor on staff. We had to have licensed teachers on staff because kids with concerns with drug addictions they have all kinds of attendant mental health things going on. They all have ADHD. You cannot put them in front. Well, that's a gross exaggeration, but most of our students were diagnosed with ADHD and something else. You can't put them in front of a computer online class and expect them to pay attention and learn anything. They need loving teachers who teach them to love themselves. Finding a staff that can do that, number one, is huge. Number two, you're right, they will run. Our kids at our school, which was called Community High School, came from California. They came from Miami. They were prostitutes. They were meth heads. They were heroin addicts, all of those things. And resources have to be allocated. It is wonderful to make all the laws in the world and have all of the mandates in the world. So I want to know really what the plan is to allocate resources to address these extensive needs of these teenagers before they need Magdalene. And I totally value the work at Magdalene, but we had 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds. It is very, where to come out of a crack addiction is incredible. We're honored that you're here with us today. Our kids who were in our school were incredibly successful. The year we closed, we had everyone graduated from high school, everyone went to college. One is a nurse, or in nursing school now. She, etc. So I just want to point out, though, that the resources required are extensive, probably about $23,000 per child per year.
Okay, I can tell we have some folks that want to address that. So, Derek.
Well, I would certainly agree with that. And maybe one point I would like to make is that when we have a foreign national victim, it's relatively easy to get services for them. When we have U.S. citizens, and I will say that pretty much exclusively our minors are U.S. citizens, there are no resources. So it's a challenge that we face every day. People ask how we're funded. I say I look at the cracks in the sofa for coins, and that's really true.
And I
Yes.
will speak to the model we have always operated from is actually that we don't take any state or federal funding. Magdalene doesn't do that, and it in many ways helps us to remain true to the original mission. But it is a testament to this community that Magdalene has grown and is as viable as it is because you know, maybe a fifth of our revenue every year comes from the John School, but the rest of it comes from individual private giving here in Nashville. And that has worked well for us. I think that what you're speaking about is what our taxpayer resource, what those kind of revenue streams for something like a school for kids.
And we raised a lot of money. We raised $250,000, $400,000 a year because the cost was, but it still wasn't enough to satisfy the need.
And do the efforts that you're involved with that are coordinating services and agencies, are the school districts involved in those as well?
Yeah. We've worked peripherally with some of the school districts and the outlying counties, not with Davidson County. Most of the work that we do with young people is in after-school clubs, inner-city ministries, that sort of thing.
Okay. Should they be?
Say that again?
Should they be?
Oh, I absolutely think they should. I just know they have a lot of requests for presentations, and so it's a hard nut to crack.
Okay.
But if anyone wants to help us do it, that'd be great.
Any other questions? Yes. And is there a microphone?
Yeah, I had a question.
Oh, okay.
You've spoken a lot about what the victim profile is, but I was wondering if you could go into briefly. I'm sure there's a perpetrator profile. Are they victims who have chosen to empower themselves? Are they just feeding their addiction? Why would someone turn to such a horrible crime?
That's a really interesting question, and again, I'm sure that there are other people in the panel who have something to put into this. We often see perpetrators who were once themselves victims of sexual abuse. The bottom line is a lot of our defendants are driven by money. We often see large-scale criminal organizations that really specialize in drug trafficking but also have this added piece of sex trafficking. I've had defendants tell me that it is easier to traffic a young girl than it is to deal with foreign drug cartels and debts owed to them and the trafficking of drugs than it is to manipulate someone who's 12 years old within a certain geographic area. The other thing I will add, and I alluded to this earlier, we're not necessarily dealing with defendants who are not sophisticated. They may not be well educated, but they are highly sophisticated. They know how to spot these victims. They know how to string them out for a long period of time. Some of this also includes substance abuse to get the victim addicted to a substance so that they're therefore even more vulnerable to these manipulations. So the common characteristics would be someone who is driven by money in an unbridled way, and someone who exists in a sort of underworld economy and may have an existence there already, and this just becomes another commodity that they're trading. And I use that language very sensitively.
We haven't talked much about the financial aspect of this, but how large an industry is this? How much money is involved in Tennessee?
That I'll defer to, and hopefully I'm not putting Margie on the spot. One thing I will say, and we've discussed this before, and I wanted to leave this with the audience, and Margie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the average age of a prostitute in Tennessee is 14. And
That's probably the average age of entry.
the average age of entry then is 14. But I wanted to leave that with the audience as well to make sure that you understand that that is the demand. That age does not exist unless there's a demand for that. So I just wanted to add that piece. But
we've not ever tried to put a monetary figure on it in Tennessee. You can look at the number of trafficked victims according to the studies here in Tennessee. You can guesstimate. There have been studies done about what an in-call versus what an out-call. Anywhere from $100 to $150 for an hour. And if you have if your girl is turning, I don't know, 5, 6, 8, 10 tricks a night, and you've got 4 or 5 girls in your stable, which is the term that they refer to, pimp refers to as those are the girls that work for him. you can see where that's a pretty lucrative business. Worldwide, they say it's a $32 billion industry. The State Department says it's the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the country, if not the world. We are seeing, I think Steve would probably back me up on this, that a lot of the folks that were dealing drugs in the last 5 to 10 years, last decade, have now moved over into dealing girls because they're not illegal in and of themselves to possess, and it's a reusable commodity. You can sell them over and over and over again. If you sell a kilo once, you might make $3 grand off of it, but then you got to go get another one. And the penalties for selling a kilo of cocaine are much higher than they are for selling a 15-year-old girl. Prior to 2011, it was a Class A misdemeanor in this state. Wow. I'm happy to report that it's now a Class B felony. But that's what you're talking about. You're talking about individuals very savvy who are saying to themselves, why am I taking felony chances for misdemeanor money? That's a quote from one of our bad guys. Felony chances for misdemeanor money. They're smart, these people. Again, maybe not all that well educated, but I certainly wouldn't underestimate them. They're obviously thriving and doing well. So it is extremely lucrative. If it wasn't, we wouldn't all be sitting here today.
Wow, that really puts it in perspective. Just a minute, Steve. Let's get this lady in the back had a question.
Robin Holland, Hope Clinic for Women. Along with the pregnancy element that we provide services for in an underserved population here in Nashville, we also do the prevention, which is the STI treatment, testing and treatment. And through that, we've had some exposure to, exposure being probably not the best word, I'm sorry. We've been able to serve young women who have addressed their environments and the background in the sex trafficking. And my question really goes toward, we're so thrilled to know about these entities that where we can direct resources and all. However, my question would be, with the people that are involved in this forum, is there training, is there channels through the local law enforcement agencies, which would be the natural default for somebody who may be looking for help? And because that was something we ran across. And so I would just ask what kind of relationships, what kind of training, what kind of services are being provided through, say, Nashville Metro Police Department, Williamson County Sheriff's Department, things like entities such as that on the local level.
I'm not aware of any training that's being conducted by local agencies. They may be doing some in-house training. I know that TBI, like I said, has rolled out a pretty comprehensive statewide program. I've been everywhere from Bristol to Memphis in the last 13 months. We at TBI have trained over 2,200 first responders just in that time period. And I'm going to continue with this basic class through next July. And I've done them at the Jackson Hospital, the Bristol Hospital, and again, we're bringing in a multidisciplinary group. And so we're catching local law enforcement, but again, nothing. I'm not aware of any that's being rolled out by local law enforcement.
I apologize. I don't know that I made myself really clear. I guess my question would be is for that person who is looking for help and who might contact that local entity, is there a relationship? Are there channels that naturally take them through the local law enforcement agencies into TBI or into resources? If they're calling the local police and say, I need help, do they naturally, is there a relationship then
it depends,
that would take them
yes,
to you all?
It depends on whether or not they call Metro Nashville. If they call Metro Nashville, then Metro Nashville is going to help them because they've got a tremendous program and their folks are extremely well trained. If they call a smaller department, a department that maybe is not as well trained, then they might end up at the TBI because we're an assist agency. We're going to assist agencies with crimes that they don't have specialized training on. And so that may be, we may get to them through that local agency, or they may end up with the FBI because we're a pass-through as well.
Margie, is that where the hotline can help, though, at once it's a little bit better known as a resource for people?
It is. I mean, that's going to be a much quicker much quicker path for a victim to get services or help to go through the hotline.
Okay. question?
Just really quickly,
Oh,
if I could
yes.
just address that question very quickly. Part of the U.S. Attorney's Human Trafficking Committee, one of our agenda items is to provide training, and perhaps that is something that we can discuss in our next meeting, is to offer some sort of multidisciplinary training that's open to the public and is particularly geared toward local law enforcement.
Yes.
I'm Lily Bell Brands, and I'm a sophomore at Swanee, and I just want to know how you think that we can get college-age kids involved in the awareness here. If you look around the room, I don't really see a lot of other college kids, and we're here at Vanderbilt. You have Swanee, Rhodes, UT, Center, all these universities in Tennessee, and I think that we're poised to really help get the awareness out there, educate people, but I don't even think we know what is going on and how bad it is.
Good question.
If I could really just address that pretty quickly. There are student organizations at every college and university. There are women's group organizations, and I'm not making this a women's issue exclusively. But what you may want to do is tap into some student organizations that exist on your campus already and actually bring in speakers, people from this panel who can come and just sort of share this information with your student body so that they're aware that this problem exists and how it exists. So my answer to your question would be to raise the awareness level as an initial matter, and I think that there are vehicles to do that through your student organizations.
And let me just add, because we focus on Tennessee, we have student groups in every university in this area and other outlying areas as far as union. So we're happy to work with you to develop a group that's focused on taking action and educating yourself. We have all kinds of initiatives, if you look on our website, that students can take part in. One example is we have door hangers that have some of the statistics for Tennessee, some of the red flags for victims, and the hotline number. And we just have students going out blitzing neighborhoods throughout Middle Tennessee so that, and I'll be brief, but I actually heard a story not long ago on the news about a woman who had been held for 19 years in a couple's home before a tip finally led to her release. I don't ever want to see that happen in our state. So that's the purpose of tools like that, so that eyes are open.
Okay. Yeah, and one. Okay, so two more questions. I was going to say one more, but let's start here.
I'm Sue Fort White with Our Kids, and we're a outpatient clinic of Nashville General Hospital. We have nurse practitioners and social workers on call 24/7, and we provide forensic medical evaluations in response to child sexual abuse. And last fiscal year, we served 931 children. 85% of them were 12 and under. And so what I want to say is, and thank you, TBI, because you've been providing the rape kits for us forever and ever, and you've also been educating some of our staff. But because we're in constant contact with jurisdictions in 46 counties of child advocacy centers, and thank God for the child advocacy centers. I know Bonnie Benecke's here today. Law enforcement and all of that. I mean, we have encountered this in our practice, and we're working closely with everybody involved. But we have to figure out how to be at the table at whatever you're going to be doing in the future, because we're on call 24/7, responding to 46 counties, and so we want to be a player and we want to be a partner.
Thank you. It seems a couple of times while we're getting to the next question, it's come up from folks who want to be, as she said, a player but aren't engaged yet. So is there a way they can get involved with the task force effort or anything like that, like the young lady who's a college student and the woman we just heard from? Are you going to be bringing in some more of these agencies as a part of that process?
We certainly can, and we had some folks at our training a year ago in Nashville from your agency or from your department, and we can certainly talk about doing some specialized training with your group going forward. But we welcome, I think, anybody that's going to add value to the process to the table.
If I could just echo what Margie said, after we're done, if you could pass me your business cards or some contact information, I can make sure you're on the email list for the next meeting.
Okay, one last question here.
Just one thing, it's really more of a comment and let somebody confirm the statistic. Today it seems like the narrative has, I'm Susie Higginbotham, the board chair for End Slavery, Tennessee. Today I've heard more, and it was interesting, it seems the narrative has been the progression from child abuse in the home perhaps, then to being trafficked, and then going on to prostitution after you have the habit, and then the good story about the survivors who come through. But the thing that really breaks my heart is that I think this is the right statistic, is a lot of these children don't have the lifespan to go from trafficking to prostitution and then maybe get whole. What I think the average lifespan of a trafficked young victim is 7 years. Am I right about that? So a lot of these victims don't get there, and so a lot of the services that they might otherwise get, I'm sorry to say, you know, they're not here with us. And so that makes this really, really urgent to me.
Urgent and early intervention, obviously, is important. That's the last question. I'm sorry. We have a timeline. But I certainly hope that you all are much better informed about this topic. And most importantly, I hope we're all motivated to use our influence and our voices to help bring an end to this problem and prevent it. And now I'll turn it over to Grace. Okay.
Would you all join me in giving a big hand to our wonderful moderator and panel? I learned so much today. We all learned so much, and I'm so grateful to see so many of you here today. I also, in particular, want to thank a very brave young woman who came here today to share her story. Sheila, thank you so much. We are grateful to our many sponsors today. Again, thank you, First Tennessee, the Tennessee Trucking Association. We also want to thank Ellen Lehman, Nashville Public Television. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you helping us make this forum possible. But in particular, I think we have two women to thank who have spent countless hours for the last 6 months making this event possible. Will you help me thank Elizabeth Broyhill and Holly Coltia. It's a great job. As Margie mentioned, the Women's Fund is extremely involved in dedicating their time and their energy to helping women and children in Tennessee. Margie mentioned our hotline. For the first time, the Women's Fund is combining forces with the Women's Funds in Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Nashville to put on this hotline. So what can we all do about this today? What can we take back with us? Let's take back the information that we've learned today. Spread the word. Tell people about this problem and this crime that we have today. Tell people about our hotline. Spread the word. And by educating the public, can we all help our young women in Nashville, and we can say and send a loud message: the women and girls in Tennessee are not for sale. Thank you.
The Women's Fund Forum is a production of the Women's Fund of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee and Nashville Public Television.